At the end of this current administration, the number of children trafficked will have grown to over 550,000.
Gets a Know Your Rights presentation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is that before or after you release them to labor traffickers?
And by the way, children we're talking about in the order of magnitude of 400 and something thousand children, which you are dismissing that they are lost. Let me ask you a very specific question, Mr. Secretary. Can you account for the whereabouts of those 400 and something thousand children?
In this video, I'm going to tell you how in the last decade, the deep state has created a system of trafficking children and putting them to work in the harshest of conditions. We're also going to see how the decisions made by Joe Biden have only made this situation more dire and why Donald Trump is going to have a very hard time dismantling this evil operation. But before we begin, let me ask you a question. Do you think it's okay for kids as young as the age of 12 to be working as roofers or slaughterhouse workers for up to 12 hours a day without any parental supervision? I don't think as Americans we can even think about allowing such a thing, and yet that's exactly what's been happening in many parts of this great country. But no one, and I mean it, no one is talking about it, and that's what blows my mind. In fact, they are doing the exact opposite of it and claiming that there are no missing children and it's all just a ploy or conspiracy theory. Just listen to what Representative J-Pal is saying about it.
Today's hearing will be one final attempt by the majority to use all their same false talking points, that the Biden administration purposefully created a border crisis and lost, in quotes, lost tens of thousands of children, all of which we know is wrong by the facts. And I'm sure the Secretary will address this as well. But let's just be clear, these children are not lost.
Well, if she says so, I guess we gotta believe her, right? No, we don't, because HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra, whom she mentions in her statement, also seems to have no idea where these kids are.
Mr. Secretary, how can you credibly claim that HHS is working to protect these children? And by the way, children we're talking about in the order of magnitude of 400 and something thousand children, which you are dismissing that they are lost. Let me ask you a very specific question, Mr. Secretary. Can you account for the whereabouts of those 400 and something thousand children? The 320,000 that were put in the report by the Inspector General, the 85,000 that we've talked about before in 2023. Do you know where all of these children are and that they are safe? Yes or no?
Congressman, as I explained the process, we get these kids when they are referred to us by the Department of Homeland Security. We then provide them with care while they are in our custody. We lose custody of those kids once we find a vetted sponsor with whom they can stay.
A vetted sponsor that murders the people that they're entrusted to because you issue a rule that doesn't even do the background check? That's what you think is appropriate care for these children? I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
As the congressman states, ever since 2021, HHS rules don't make background checks mandatory to sponsor these unaccompanied children, which of course leaves these kids vulnerable.
If you don't do the vetting right, you don't know if they're engaged in criminal activity. That's how you end up with an MS-13 gang member as the sponsor. That's how you end up with pedophiles getting 20 children in the same home. That's how you end up there because the vetting's been crappy. I mean, that's the bottom line.
And to make matters worse, as soon as Biden took office, he directed Homeland Security to stop DNA testing these unaccompanied children, which means there is no way to find them once you lose contact with the sponsors. Now, even if these children don't get picked up by gang members or criminals, they're very likely to end up working hours and hours without pay a lot of the time.
Have you read that children are scrubbing dishes? They are operating heavy machinery. They are delivering meals. They are harvesting coffee. They are working construction. They are working as housekeepers. They are working overnight shifts at plants where they are not paid. They are not going to school. They are not cared for. They are not giving meals. Almost all of it illegally. Are you aware of that? That's a yes or no.
Yes.
Do the Know Your Rights presentation help them in those situations?
Senator ORR.
That's a yes or no, I think. Do you really think that you're helping these children by releasing them to labor traffickers and, yes, sex traffickers? 85,000 children whom you have no contact with, and your answer is we gave them a presentation before we turned them over to these people who are exploiting them on a scale not seen in this country for 100 years, a century. a century. It's a disgrace.
Now, Senator Hawley here is referring to a New York Times story which told us just how horrible living conditions are for these kids who are definitely not missing. And in their latest story, they reported, children were tending giant ovens to make Chewy and Nature Valley granola bars and packing bags of Lucky Charms and Cheetos, all of them working for the processing giant Hearthside Food Solutions, which would ship these products around the country. And this wasn't happening in some underground factory in the middle of nowhere. No, it was happening in Michigan. They also talked to an inspector of Homeland Security who teared up as he recalled finding 13-year-olds working in meat plants, 12-year-olds working at suppliers for Hyundai and Kia, and children who should have been in middle school working at commercial bakeries. Now, I have a million complaints about the New York Times, but their reporting on this issue has been way better than anyone else. They have unmasked these disgusting child labor practices that are taking place in the plants of some of the biggest companies in the world. These include Walmart, PepsiCo, General Motors, and many more. But other newspapers are dismissing the severity of these reports by saying that the right is making claims about Biden and child slavery. Well, if you remove all barriers for these shady sponsors, you are indirectly responsible for what happens to these kids. So I won't blame anyone for saying that Biden is ruining the lives of hundreds of thousands of children. And as for HHS, these incidents of missing children have already tarnished their reputation, but now we're hearing reports of them taking kids away from their mothers in North Carolina as well.
And then all of a sudden DPS shows up, and then your son is gone.
They closed my case, and then a few days later, I get knocks on my door.
And so if Helene wasn't bad enough, they got to hit you when you're already vulnerable and on the edge.
They know that I'm here by myself doing what I can myself for two other human beings.
Now, at the first preliminary hearing, you were not accompanied by an attorney.
No.
You were alone.
I was alone.
And did you ask for an attorney?
I did.
And you were denied.
I filled out the paperwork. It was given back to the judge, and the judge, or the circuit, or the clerk's office 2 days later called me back and said that the Judge Bowers, denied my request.
And that's because they counted the Social Security your son receives
that follows my son
as income for you, which then disqualified your ability to retain state-appointed defense. And the craziest part is you're not receiving those funds. Protective Services is.
They go to the foster family, plus I have to pay child support on top, plus I have to have a place for him to live, plus I have to have transportation to visit him 4 months consecutively, or I lose my parental rights.
How can anyone allow them to take away their kids when they have a history of handing over these children to child traffickers and extremely violent criminals? Now, Donald Trump has been raising the issue of these missing children throughout his campaign. In fact, he was probably the reason why this issue had any mainstream media attention at all.
325,000 children are missing. Can you believe during their administration? You know, nobody talks about it. They should be talking about it. That is a human tragedy. 325. Think of what that is. That's take your biggest stadium and multiply it many times and load it up with children. That's what we're talking about. 325,000 children are missing.
Now he has appointed someone who promises to end this malicious practice as soon as possible. In his first interview since becoming the new border czar, Tom Homan said, "We have over 300,000 missing children. Over 500,000 children have been trafficked into the United States. This administration released them to unvetted sponsors, and they can't find 300,000. And based on 3.5 decades, some of these children are in forced labor. We already found some in forced labor. We need to save these children. That's going to be the third rail." Now, of course, that's good news because at least now we have an administration that not only recognizes the issue, but also promises to solve it as soon as possible. However, we also know that the people who have created this system are not going to give up so easily. I've already told you that many of these kids end up providing cheap labor for multi-billion-dollar companies. Do you think these extremely powerful organizations are not going to fight Trump? I mean, it's true that Biden has been responsible for this problem, but just look at this guy.
We are a community that relies on family, on ohana, or by friendship. But like many others,
You're telling me he's the mastermind behind such criminal activities? This situation makes it even more obvious that there was always someone pulling the strings from the shadows, and Joe Biden was just the scapegoat. And now they're going to try and do the same with Trump. I think as Americans, all we can do is make him keep his promises and push him to reveal the identities of all the people who've been hurting these children with so much impunity for so many years. Once again, I'm not taking any sides here. I'm just relaying the facts because I know most media channels don't have the authority to talk about this issue. Now, I would love to know what you think about this situation, so feel free to share your opinions in the comments section below. Quick reminder, if you have not subscribed to the channel, please take a moment to do so now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.